Thank you all for coming today. I'd like to introduce our incoming President and CEO, Jane Herring.
Thank you all very much. It's still strange to hear that. Thank you all for being here today. I'm hoping that this becomes a regular type of event we do where you can come on your lunch break and learn about something that's impacting us from beyond our borders. So I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us to discuss this really important topic today. Before we get started, it is a World Affairs Council of Orange County tradition to always start our events with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'd like to introduce one of our incredible interns, Eli Sepulveda, to please lead us in the pledge.
Please rise, face the flag, put your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
So just a few words on what to expect beyond this event. We typically go dark during August so that we can kind of reset for the new year and the new trustee class coming in. But the next event that we have will be September 12th. It's going to be From Aid to Advocacy, Poland's Involvement in Russia's War in Ukraine. That will be at Chapman University. And then on Sunday, September 29th, we will have the trustee luncheon with all of our new board members. We're still looking for a location. I have a few in mind, but we'll let you know as soon as that's confirmed. Just a reminder that on your tables, you will see question cards. You're welcome to ask anything you'd like to ask. Please make sure you write legibly and then just hold up your card when you're ready. There should be pens there as well, and one of our volunteers will pick up your card and bring it over. We'll try to keep every question relevant. And just a reminder, we are nonpartisan. We do not take a stance on any issue, but you're welcome to ask whatever you'd like, and we'll try to get to your questions. So now let's hear about who we're about to hear speak. So our moderator tonight is Dr. Samar Al-Bulushi, Professor of Anthropology at University of California, Irvine, non-resident fellow at the Quincy Institute. Her book, War Making as World Making, Kenya, the United States, and the War on Terror, argues that Kenya's emergence as a key player in the war on terror is closely linked, but not reducible to, the U.S. military's growing proclivity to outsource the labor of war. Al-Bulushi is a former contributing editor at Africa is a Country and has published in a variety of public outlets on topics ranging from the International Criminal Court to the militarization of U.S. policy in Africa. Her writing and interviews have appeared in The Intercept, Teen Vogue, Democracy Now!, Africa is a Country, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Pam Bazooka, a review of African political economy, and Warscapes. Peter Bryant, board chair of Clario, is recognized thought leader on the energy transition and the criticality of mineral value change, ESG and sustainability, and broad-scale innovation and digital transformation. He speaks on these topics extensively at leading conferences and for organizations, most recently speaking at the 2024 and 2023 Future Minerals Forums in Saudi Arabia, COP26, and CERAWeek 2022. He spoke to 1,750 global oil and gas leaders at the Baker Hughes 2020 Annual Energy Forward meeting and keynoted the New Zealand Prime Minister's 2019 Just Transition to Net Zero Emissions Summit. He currently leads the Key Minerals Forum, an informal coalition of major mining companies and policymakers formed in 2024, created to help educate and inform members of U.S. Congress on global issues related to the energy transition and the key minerals needed. Peter is the board chair of Clario, a forum that provides expert advice to the mining and energy sectors, and co-founder and board chair of the Development Partner Institute, a nonprofit focused on improving social, economic, and environmental outcomes for communities from resource development projects. Peter co-authored The Growth Champions, The Battle for Sustained Innovation Leadership, published in 2012. And finally, Dr. Kelechi Kalu, Vice Provost of International Affairs and Professor of Political Science at University of California, Riverside. Kalu previously served as Associate Provost for Global Strategies and International Affairs and Professor of African American and African Studies at Ohio State University. His PhD is in International Studies from the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at University of Denver. Kalu earned an MA in Political Science from University of Dayton, Ohio, and a BA in Political Science from University of North Texas, Denton, Texas. He is widely published and has served as consultant to the World Bank on public sector governance and to the Asian Development Bank on managing sustainable development in research-rich countries. He is co-editor and contributor of West Africa and the U.S. War on Terror, to territoriality, citizenship and peace building, perspectives on challenges to peace in Africa, and United States-Africa security relations. Please join me in welcoming all these distinguished speakers.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Samar Al-Bulushi, and I very much look forward to the conversation today. I also wanted to extend gratitude to the organizers who have put in a considerable amount of work to make today's event possible. So to get us started, I have probably 3 overarching questions that I'm going to pose to our panelists. The first will have us think very generally about what's happening on the African continent today. The second will have us think about Africa's relationship to the wider world. And in the third part of the conversation, we'll think specifically about the role of aid, of foreign aid. So welcome to my fellow panelists. What is happening on the continent today? Paul Kagame of Rwanda has just secured a 4th term in office as president. And some analysts praise Kagame for what he's accomplished on the economic front, while others insist that this has come at the expense of human rights at home and at the expense of peace in the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo. Meanwhile, in Kenya, we're witnessing the most significant challenge to the government in decades, with protesters storming parliament and calling for the resignation of President William Ruto, who is a close ally of the United States. And in West Africa and the Sahel, we've observed a wave of military coups in the past few years, in some cases led by US-trained generals. What, in your assessment, are the driving forces of change on the continent today, and how should we make sense of them?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm an African, specifically from Nigeria. We acknowledge each other's existence. That's a loaded question. Thank you, Dr. Al-Bulushi. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so let me be very brief. What is going on in the continent of Africa today? The references that have been made with regard to Kenya is very insightful in the sense that the youth of that country have decided they need a government that responds to them, not a government that responds to external influences. They need governance that impacts their lives, specifically access to food, affordable food, access to health care, security, and they need a government that reflects them, not a government that has reflected the gerontocracy that we've known in the continent. When you come to Rwanda, you look at a country that was almost dead, but retrieved from the abyss of devastation by Paul Kagame. The people, you have to be on the ground in Rwanda to really experience the energy, the transformation that has happened in that country. They are happy to elect him and re-elect him consistently. The complaints about the crisis in the north or in the Goma region, may I remind us that during the 1994 genocide, for example, the French not only lifted all their own staff, but they also took their dogs and left the Rwandese who worked with them to die. The Belgians did the same thing. United States did not want the word genocide to be uttered. The United Nations was incapable of helping the Rwandese. The same genocidaires who were responsible for the crisis now were pushed to the northern part of the country in the Goma region. And we now spend about $1 million a day to sustain them. What is going on in Rwanda is a transformation coming from the inside, a transformation that is devoid of external dictates. You look at the Sahel, you look at West Africa, the reference to coups. The continent of Africa, dating back to Egypt, 1952, has been experiencing coups every now and then. So it's not new to us. The question is, why are these coups erupting their heads every now and then? In the case of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, etc., this is because, again, external influence in these countries have not resulted in transformation or positive impact on the life of the people. I'm talking about the French. They've been there since 1884, 1885, partition that divided Africa amongst European countries. But especially at the end of the Second World War, the French have been in those countries, including Senegal. They've been there. They've not led or helped the countries to truly transform into stable, sustainable, developed entities. Instead, those countries have remained as they were created, outward facing, extractive resource exports to fuel development and engagement with the outside world. Look at the capital cities of all the countries, including Kenya. By the way, Nairobi was not designed by the British to be a capital territory. It was supposed to be sort of a vacation spot. Tell me when to stop. All the countries are on the port. The rail lines, everything is towards the port. Taking, moving out. What comes in? Things that we are bringing in are things that are manufactured from outside. I will give you one case study. What is going on in Africa today? Look at the energy sector. African countries have been lucky. Now Ghana is on board. Uganda is on board. Crude petroleum is bubbling up. No functioning refinery. The crude petroleum is exported to be refined overseas and re-imported into the continent. What are you doing? You are creating wealth for outsiders and creating poverty for African countries. Because the export of the crude petroleum, you pay in US dollars. The importation in US dollars. You don't have capacity to manage your economy, to stabilize the system in enough for the young people to see the future that they would like to be part of. These are some of the domestic sources of tension in the continent. What is going on? We are filled with tension that is directly connected to the way the state, the individual state, were created. Tension connected to the ways in which external entities and institutions have mismanaged the narrative of development. Is there a particular country anywhere in the world that has developed following the free market economic principles and policies? Effective development comes from state effective management of its economy. If you don't get what I'm saying, United States is very interested in securing the benefit of economic development for its citizens. That's why we spend money during COVID. That's why we give tax cuts to businesses. These are good things. That's why we spend money to subsidize student education. But the tension you're seeing in Africa is the bifurcation of government responsibility and the privileging of the private market, which have not served the people well. That's what is going on in Kenya. Wait till August 1st, there might be a bigger problem in Nigeria. Yeah. Because the different sectors are now agitating. Right. We haven't seen what you promised us, i.e. the current administration. Right. I can go on and on, but let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kalu. You've gotten us started with a set of very provocative ideas. So I'm sure we'll be continuing along those lines. Mr. Bryant, I'll let you jump in.
Thanks. I won't be able to match your passion, Kelechi, not being from Africa. So I'm going to talk about this in context of mining and energy. And you might go, why are we talking about mining at an event about Africa? So first is, probably unbeknown to most of you in the room, this energy transition that we're trying to go through is we're actually transitioning from a fossil fuel dependent energy system to one that is absolutely dependent on minerals. And minerals are produced through mining. And it just happens Africa has 30% of the proven reserves of all the minerals that we need to get us through. So what we're seeing is a second wave of resource development being unleashed in Africa in a way that's never been seen before, okay? And I think there's several aspects of that we need to understand. So first is the first wave, and Kelechi, you touched on this, the first wave of resource development, which is a God-given resource endowment that is not repeatable, has not in any way, shape, or form resulted in any level of prosperity for these countries. In fact, it probably has increased poverty, and it's commonly known as the Dutch disease, which is a term invented by the economist in the 70s to explain it. And there's a whole bunch of complex reasons: capacity, capability, corruption, colonial, etc. behavior. So that result in that. So what are we going to see with this next wave, which is really happening over the next 20 years? One is great power competition. Is China particularly is investing billions and billions in Africa as an alternative to the West, because the West, the US, particularly in the EU, we're kind of a moralizing, superior colonialist attitude when we go into Africa still. So China are playing chess, I say. We're wondering what game we should play in Africa still. And in a third emerging strategic, country entering Africa is Saudi Arabia, who is wanting to invest $200 to $300 billion in mining in Africa and have the concept of the super region. So we have this great power interest, and then you have players like Turkey, India, and other countries in individual ones. And then you have spoilers like Russia that are annoying. So within that context, the African countries have a huge opportunity. So how do we go about developing these resources in a way where they can grow prosperity? So one is they want to move away from what they consider a colonial model, which of extract and ship. And Kelechi, you touched on this, is we, the West, dig out all the resources, and China's like this too, and then ship them out of the country. And so they don't retain the value. So there's a big push. We want to retain more and more of the value of our resources to help grow the prosperity of our country. And it's really important. I mean, there are 500 to 600 million people in Africa that have zero electricity. We all sit here complaining our air conditioning is, there's a blackout. And when you don't have electricity, don't have water, the women have to walk X miles to bring water back and forth. Life expectancy is horrible. Children don't get an education. There's big safety issues. This is a problem. So all this deficit, they want to turn this resource wealth into growing prosperity, build the infrastructure. So the role of the US in this is critical, and particularly, and maybe Europe's don't have the resources. We need to come in with a solution without them moralizing, because we have to respect these countries are a different part of their development. They are not the United States in 2024. They are, in this varies 54 countries we're talking about, they're different parts of their development, so we need to respect that and give them the support and help where they need it. And so we can supplement resource wealth with infrastructure investment, and we'll talk about aid later, and building up that capacity and capability in those countries. And we can be a good partner. And the Saudi Arabian message is we want to help you as countries, because we're perplexed how you can have all these resources and be so poor. Look at us. We turned our oil into massive wealth. okay, and we want to do the same for you and do it in the right way. And that's not a message they hear from us, not a message they hear from China. So, you know, it's a game, unfortunately. What I worry about, my final comment, is that because we're sitting on the sidelines, is that, you know, things won't go well for China again, for Africa again, and that we will end up with the same result: massive resource extraction, some growth and prosperity, but not in a way that's meaningful, not in the way that we have enjoyed progress from our resource development or Europe. I mean, we all built, we've got to realize our countries were all built on the development of our resources back 100, 200, 300 years ago. So we need to give Africa the opportunity and the pathway to make that happen for them. Otherwise, there's still going to be that continent with 600 million people without electricity, which is immoral at any level. And, you know, and allow them to bring the things that they need just for basic living. So it's, you know, kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So, and we can delve deeper into mining and energy as well, but I think those are the key points.
Excellent, thank you. So my next question will in many ways build on some of the points each of you have made, and that is thinking about Africa's relationship to the wider world. And I have a few statistics I think that kind of can help us think about this. The first is that by 2050, Africa will account for 25% of the world's population. It contains some of the world's fastest growing economies, and as a region, it represents the world's 8th largest economy. So it's partly with this in mind that we can make sense of the escalating number of foreign players who are competing for influence on the continent. Typically, you know, in the media, we hear primarily about the US, China, and Russia, right? But there are a growing number of middle powers, as Mr. Bryant mentioned, like Saudi Arabia, like the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and India, who are also playing a role in shaping political and economic dynamics. Now, some people would characterize what we're witnessing, and I think, Mr. Bryant, you were kind of alluding to this, that we're witnessing a new scramble for Africa, right? But others would insist that we should attend more closely to the agency and strategic thinking of African political leaders themselves. So I might ask you, each of you, to kind of weigh in on that point. And the final point is whether this is a question about Africa needing the rest of the world, or is it about the world needing Africa?
I'll go first. You'll give you time to shape the answer. That's a tricky question, isn't it? I'm a big believer in partnership, actually, to make things happen. So I think there is a very strong need for partnership. And partnership always starts with mutual respect for each other and a partnership of equals. And I think that's something, you know, we're working with the US government to try and get us to that point in the context of mineral resource development. And, you know, there's countries, I mean, Nigeria, for example, has $700 billion of proven mineral reserves over and above its oil and gas. So if we want to develop those resources, we need to go in as an equal partner and provide, you know, capital, capacity, political risk insurance, which helps companies operate in those countries. You know, and it's difficult with politics, you know. So I was involved with Rio Tinto. They have a giant iron ore project in Guinea called Simindu, massive, and it took 25 years to finally get it off the ground. And the joint investor in the end was with China, because they have to build a 300-mile railroad, a deep-sea port. I mean, it's huge infrastructure. But it's about partnership, and we can't wait 25 years in general, but the US was absent in that discussion. We weren't a player or even an option for Guinea. So we need to thoughtfully think about, you know, and I think it's terrible to say we need Africa or Africa needs us. I think it's about partnership. If Milken Institute in LA, for example, and it's about capacity, they have a training program to educate young people from Africa, you know, for treasury roles. So they build them up for a 1-2 year program to give them the capabilities of people that operate in the US Treasury and the UK Treasury. And those are programs that we need to do at a greater scale. So, and the other thing, last thing may I say, is kind of respect for things. So like most people, when they hear artisanal mining and see children clamoring over mines, we all go, oh my God, and want to shut them down. And I remember a minister at one of the ministerial roundtables for the World Economic Forum said, I know Apple wants to have us shut down artisanal mining, but, you know, I have 10 million people that are dependent on artisanal mining, and there's no other that is distinct from illegal mining, no other way for these people to earn a living. And if you were to shut that down, I have no way to give those people a living, 10 million people. So it's kind of like, how do you accommodate that, bring those people into a more safer operating environment, and eventually grow the country's economy so they do have alternatives? So I always say we've become a country of no. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And we don't give these people alternatives. So I think that's kind of, through my nonprofit, I always say trust comes from deeper understanding. So once you understand people, you trust them, then you can co-create and collaborate on what a future looks like for the country. So that's my kind of perspective. And and you got to look past. You might have to deal with governments and opposition parties that may, in our framing, be distasteful. You can't judge people. Each country's at a different progress politically, and you just have to work with what the governments are to do the best we can. So.
Again, thank you, Peter, for your analysis and explanation. Does the world need Africa, or does Africa need the world? Let me be very simple. Africa is the world. Africa is the world. If it wasn't, Europeans, in order to solve their internal problems following the Napoleon War, would not have gathered with the blessings of United States at the Berlin Conference to partition the continent amongst Europeans without any African present. And except for South Sudan, Eritrea, those partitions remain as they were back then. They were partitioned for specific purposes to serve external interests. The only reason African countries, with the exception of Ethiopia, although invaded in 1936 by Italy, became independent is because Europeans again fought among themselves and devastated each other. They couldn't hold on to the colonial territories. That's how we became independent. And at independence, our leaders that dared to question the nature of the state and the capacity of the different states were taken out. I'm talking about Patrice Lumumba in the DRC. I'm talking about Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. If you want to think about understanding the continent of Africa and the challenges, just think about Zaire. All your energy, hopes, battery, minerals are there. And yet the country, the size of Belgium, remains fractured from that first scene of removing the man who said, now we have independence, we will rethink how we govern ourselves and manage our resources. Peter, I disagree with you about U.S. not being involved. U.S. has always been in the background. The difference is U.S. has always worked through the United Kingdom. Because U.S. is a child. Don't forget, U.S. was a former colony. U.S. could not have implemented the Monroe Doctrine without United Kingdom. And so what you have is a situation where the new child, United States, carries on the agenda of the parent. Which is why when you look at United States nomenclature, when you talk about Africa, you are not really talking about black Africa. Because the entire Maghreb is linked with the Middle East. That's why you see Saudi Arabia, Turkey, all infiltrating on the basis of old alliances and religion. They all need Africa. As I tell African government and students across board, as long as there is one white person, European, still in the continent, there is a whole lot left to be gotten from the continent. And the only time United States actually assertively made a difference, it was a big difference. It was under George W. Bush with PEPFAR. Directly engage, bypassing Britain and others on the question of HIV/AIDS. Small secret, there is something called farm subsidy in this country. Farm subsidy is a major blow to African countries because it reduces the price of agricultural product to the benefit of Americans at the expense of Africans and other less developed countries. They need us. We are the destination market. AGOA is wonderful as long as the content has American products. They need us. Oil. Oh, let me stop right there. Let me just talk about a more contemporary issue. Terrorism. Terrorism. Why is every country of relevance in the Western world and in Asia present in Djibouti? Why? That strategic location, that tiny little space with less than 1 million in population. It's because it sits at a strategic location for transshipment. You need us. The question is, do we know our value? You call us Africans. We call ourselves Ghanaians, Nigerians, Kenyans, South Africans, Zimbabweans. When you hold a meeting, you bring all the African heads of state together. You say, we've dealt with Africa. No, you need us. I'm sorry to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for our last question. We'll have to keep the responses to this last one short in order to still have time for the Q&A. The last one, as I mentioned, is on the role of aid. And again, we'll see kind of a revisiting of some themes that have already been raised. Some argue that discussions about foreign aid to Africa are misleading because more money, roughly 40 billion US dollars, actually leaves the continent every year than enters it. And this is at least partly because many African countries spend a considerable amount of money repaying their external debts, which subsequently makes it hard for them to pay for basic services like healthcare and education. So what, if anything, needs to change when it comes to economic policy and the role of aid?
Okay. If not.
Foreign aid is not aid. Foreign aid is economic and security development for the donor countries. When US gives African countries foreign aid, it's not money transferred to African countries. It's money given to American farmers or American companies to produce certain products sent to these countries. It's a very smart policy on the part of US, on the part of England. Humanitarian aid is different from foreign aid. Right now, think about interest rates. The interest rate on which loans are based is set by the US Federal Reserve Bank. Africans do not control the interest rate. The challenge of compound interest, You pay back the principal 2 times, 3 times, you're still owing. Is part of the strangling hold from the international system. If foreign aid is working, aid for development, official development assistance, could you please tell me why Zimbabwe remains a basket case? Or why Zambia defaulted? Or why Ghana, the promise of the last 10 years, is now more dependent on foreign money for its budget when it has all the resources to change the economic dynamic in the country? We should understand aid for what it is. It is political. It is not free to anybody. It works for the donors. Just one quick example. People think about South Korea. Look at how South Korea transitioned from poverty in the early 60s to this massive industrial outfit. South Korea was able to do that by simply taking a different approach. You tell us not to build steel mill. Thank you very much. We hear you. Kasamnida. They go back and do exactly what you told them not to do. You bring in your food aid under General Park. He refuses to distribute them and tells the people, you work in order to get what we give you. After a while, US mentored the South Korean government with its involvement in the Vietnam War, gradually helped them to build the infrastructure that helped the country to transform itself. That has never happened in any African country. Thank you.
Kelechi, thanks. Complicated. So aid's a bigger term. So I always say aid in crises is absolutely warranted and needed, which you mentioned, like HIV, AIDS. If there's a crisis, aid, perfect. Everything else does come with strings attached. So let's not pick on the US too much, but China. So I think Africa's found out China's as bad, if not worse, than every other actor. So they've come in with massive funding of infrastructure projects. The infrastructure's kind of it's okay. Then they're finding out that if you can't pay the interest, that the default results in all the assets transferring to Chinese ownership, and it's all Chinese labor, not local labor. So Africa's kind of off the China model as well. So it's kind of looking for a new model. I'm going to go back to energy. I mean, if you don't have electricity for 600 million people, this is a massive, massive drag on any sort of economic development. We have to solve energy in Africa. And I think where capital, as I look into the future, and I agree, I mean, the way capital's flowed into Africa as of late is not good. And we wrote a paper for the Saudi Arabian government, for the super region, for the Ministerial Roundtable on examples of countries that have industrialized. South Korea won. Taiwan's even a better example of a country that was cheap labor making clothing and transformed itself to an industrial powerhouse by doing what it wanted and attracting capital in to multiply the capital they brought in to de-risk projects for private enterprise. So we just need a different model. But I worry because of the superpower competition over resources that we won't create the space for that to happen. And we've got to stop moralizing. Like, I mean, I've listened to actually the Nigerian minister actually said at a round table, he goes, I've got half my population without electricity. He said, you guys, and he pointed to the UN, World Bank people in the room, wouldn't let me develop my coal to make coal-fired power stations, so no electricity for that. You won't let me build gas because you're anti that, so I'm sitting here with no electricity. And he said, and the hypocrisy of you people, so when Ukraine gets invaded by Russia and Europe's going to get a bit cold, you come to me, Europe came to him and asked, could you export to us several 100 million tons of coal? I mean, it's pretty hypocritical of us, right? So I think we need to just, build the energy infrastructure, help build it, not build it ourselves, but work with these countries to kind of grow their economies. And again, and I'll go back to a partnership style, but we need to break the old model. And somehow we need to break through the barrier of distrust as a result of colonial behavior, whether it's British, American, I mean, it's a long, long history. And I remember Henry Kissinger saying your point about us being a baby, when a British Prime Minister said to him, boy, you guys are really lousy at diplomacy. And Kissinger's response, well, you guys have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're still in kindergarten on this. We've only been doing it for a few decades. So I'm not sure we've progressed since that comment, but there we go. Anyway, back to you. Yeah, go.
The issue about China, if you know China the way I do, you will understand the Chinese are no better, but they are doing something that Africans can see. They can see the roads, they can see the buildings, even if they are poorly constructed. Europeans left big gullies, no serious infrastructure. And talking about energy, it's the Chinese involvement that is creating opportunity for energy infrastructure. We have opportunity if you really want to talk about changing the model. From my point of view, it's easy, but the political will is not there.
Thank you. All right, we are now going to turn to some of the questions from the audience, and I'm going to combine, to the extent possible, some of the questions in the interest of time. The first two are not really related, so I'll just pose them both to you, and you can choose if you want to answer one or both. The first is, a few years ago, a book was published entitled How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. In your discussion, you've already touched on many points that the book raises. During the Cold War, many African leaders were overthrown, such as Lumumba and Nkrumah. In the new tug of war, how can the safety and security of Africa, its leaders, and its resources be guaranteed? And will the ideals of Pan-Africanism be realized? The next question is, who, if anyone, or any entity of the USA has successful models of empowerment of African nations in resource development? Are there any duplicable models?
We agree. I'll take question one. African countries, African citizens, we need to go back to the drawing board and leave the Europeans alone. How Europe underdeveloped Africa is not news. The real news is why Africans, after 50 years of independence, 60 years in some instances, our leaders continue to listen to outsiders, not engaging the people, their own people. We buy into the argument about electoral politics as governance. So if we've had election, the West will clap, yay, that was election. It went well, except for Paul Kagame. He's been there too long. You need to get him out. But what Paul Kagame is doing is different. He's engaging his people. He's engaging his people. Africans need to engage Africans. And we need to engage our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. Because when the Europeans came, they did not take the sick people from various African countries. They did not take the old people. They took the strongest out of the continent. Over 12 million. For what? To develop where you and I are. Various European formations. We need to reconnect with our brothers and sisters and maybe create a bridge that will transform the continent, country by country. That's why I say Europeans need us. We don't need them. We have what we need. We just haven't made the decision to look inwards and build out.
So I'll take question two and touch on question one. Our shining examples, it's hard, but probably it's a small country, but it's a shining example of resource development, but not critical, and that's Botswana, actually. with diamonds. It's a shining example in terms of taking its resource wealth, generating a fairly prosperous country is on the back of that. Reasonable political stability, not perfect. The company they did with that, not American, and that was a British South African company called Anglo-American and De Beers. And that model has really worked very well, and it hasn't been replicated, to be honest. Because I think it's a combination of in-country capacity, which seems to be lacking a lot, and that's how do you build that capacity? So you look at countries like Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, they build meritocracies in their civil service, and Singapore's the same. The people you meet, like world class, and just brilliant, and they just build the capacity and capability in their country, and they literally stash the money. You take Norway, Saudi Arabia, they take all the funds from resources and put them into sovereign funds, and then they distribute those sovereign funds in a way that makes sense for their country to diversify the economy. And I think that's a model that needs to kind of be embraced, but at some point, African countries need to take responsibility, and I think Kagame is a great example. And one example at Milk and Global, I was with the ministers from Rwanda, it was a few years pre-COVID, but they gave the example of electricity. It's just like taking responsibility. I need to get electricity to all the rural people because there's safety, education, and I don't want that electricity to exceed X% of the income of those rural people, which is a few dollars a week, right? So it's one PowerPoint, so I need one PowerPoint, one stovetop, one light bulb. And he had like 3 categories. And an Israeli company, and which is now spread to 6 African countries, came up with a model where they actually make money still in providing a solar panel, 1 PowerPoint, 1 light bulb, 2 light bulbs, 2 PowerPoints. That is, I think it was like 15% of the wage that these people got. They did it. And that's a way to get electricity out into rural populations so kids could do homework at night. And it was literally women can go out at night to tend with the animals because it was not safe to do so. So things like that, I think, are important. So again, Botswana is a model, building a meritocracy in your own civil service. And really, when you're doing that, how can we help in accelerating that versus, kind of the behavior that we've had in the past? So, my thoughts.
Excellent, thank you. All right, the next round of questions, I'm going to combine 3 because they all overlap in some shape or form with the theme of U.S.-Africa relations and U.S. Competition, for lack of a better word, with China and Russia. So the first is, what moralizing does the U.S. need to drop in order to be more effective in development assistance and being competitive with China? The second is, Dr. Kalu, the West seems to be declining in terms of influence in Africa. While the West is often criticized for imposing moral codes on African partners, what will African countries ultimately concede for the money China and Russia are pouring into the continent? So those first 2 are closely related. And then the third is about the Wagner Group, the Russian army for hire, which plays a big role in Africa to extract natural resources. And the question is, what does the global community do? What can it do to mitigate Russia's meddling in Africa?
I'll tackle moralizing since I used that word. I think, when we go into countries, so first thing is, I've heard enough that, America is a preferred partner. The problem is we moralize, and I'll tell you what we moralize about, and in the time we get to maybe a memorandum of understanding, which only touches on some things, the Chinese have delivered an integrated package and offering with capital and progress. And they know the warts on the Chinese model. They know that. They're not stupid, but it's the only offer on the table. So they go with China. So the moralizing we do is human rights. Your human rights are terrible. You need to have labor laws that are like America. The environment, oh my goodness. Climate change, oh my God, you can't do coal, you can't do natural gas. We don't give them alternatives. So it's not respecting those countries. There's no governments. There's going to be bad governments, but they all want to do the right thing by their country, but it's showing no respect for where they're at. And I've heard African ministers say, often we hear from America that they want us to do things in a way that is actually higher order than what they do in their own country. So, So I think that impedes us because we're kind of dictating to how they should operate their countries. And that comes across like a lead balloon. My last point too is just around those memorandum of understanding. So we just need a better coordinated approach, drop the moralizing, let countries develop them in a way that makes sense for those countries. And the companies, and the US government has this concept of private champions, which are the companies that operate alongside, that go in, and then you rely, if they're Western companies, you're going to rely on them to operate at the best standards possible. So we don't need to do this government-to-government moralizing. We can just let the partners do that, and that's just a natural evolution of the country. We can't expect everybody to jump to whatever our standard is, in a blink of an eyelid. So.
Thanks, Peter. The West is not declining in terms of development, in terms of knowledge, research, innovation. The West is only declining in terms of its ability to replace the population. And the same problem with East Asian countries. The only subcontinent that is improving in this regard, of course, is Africa, or more specifically sub-Saharan Africa, where you're going to have over 700 million young people ready to take on the challenges. So the West is still very strong. The question is, to what extent does the West see opportunity in these teeming young people that need to be educated, that need to understand that the world we live in cannot be lived in isolation? Peter has mentioned human rights. Stop looking at Africa as a basket case. It's not a basket case. If it were, the companies that are present, many American companies will not be there. It's not a basket case. When it comes to China-Russia relationship, China and Russia began to move more prominently because of neglect from the West. The Wagner Group is only effectively present in Sudan now because of France's neglect. They have occupied Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso. And do you know what created that opportunity? It's called Benghazi. When you took out Muammar Gaddafi, who was responsible for holding the fort, that's when those soldiers that used to work for him were let loose. Those are the ones marauding in the Sahel. The Al-Shabaabs, the Boko Harams, they're all taking their cues from that. So what do we do? The bilateral military agreements, and there are many that U.S. have signed, it's not enough. It's not enough. The Europeans need to work with the American counterpart to actually train and partner, serious partnership to end the scourge of terrorism in the continent of Africa. How do you do it? It's a simple one. It's called development. When people have hope, education, access to health care, where they can feed themselves, where they can sleep and wake up and not worry about government abusing their rights, terrorism would end. Africans don't like Russians. Africans will welcome Americans any day, any time. In fact, they know more about America than America knows about them. So what else can we do? And I'll stop here. Start teaching seriously about Africa in your universities, in your K-12 and universities. Because part of the problem is we don't know about this Africa we speak of.
Comment, because we talk about terrorism and economic deficit. Admiral James Stavridis, who's a good friend, former Supreme Commander of NATO, when he was at the Kellogg School where I was a senior fellow, he once said, let's not underestimate terrorists. He said they're really smart. He said the only difference between a terrorist and an entrepreneur is hope. And I was like, whoa. So, and I think what we're not giving, and I think what we don't see in Africa a lot, is any hope. So people go sideways, and that's the result. So I think that was kind of a profound insight, for me anyway.
All right, so I think you have each just touched on one of the questions contained on one of the forms here, and this person included two questions. So their first was related to terrorism, that has now been answered. The second is, how does Nigeria combat corruption / pilfering in the oil industry and refine its oil within its own country instead of exporting crude? Next, now these questions are not necessarily related, but I'm combining them. Would you talk about Agenda 2063, and how has this been embraced by African leaders around the continent and the international community? And there's another question here. Can you speak to the significance or lack thereof of Somalia becoming a member of the UN Security Council?
Specifically with regard to Nigeria, many of you may or may not know the largest refinery in terms of millions per barrel that will be coming to the market has been built by an individual, Aliko Dangote, in Lagos, Nigeria. What is the challenge Aliko Dangote is facing? Crude petroleum to feed into the refinery so it can be refined and made it cheaper for Nigerians and the region. Why is Aliko Dangote having problem? He's now importing crude from the US to feed into the refinery. It's because of age-old corruption, contracts that ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron have signed years ago, trapping the whole midstream, upstream oil system. The commonwealth of Nigerians are held hostage by multinationals. Corruption is not a domestic issue, it's an international issue. Is corruption by oil companies as well as leaders within the country who do not think first about their people. How do you end corruption? You never will end it. There is corruption in this country. There is corruption in England, in Russia, everywhere. But if you build a kind of institutional infrastructure, and education is central here, that holds people accountable, transparently hold them accountable, you reduce the negative effect of corruption. Because if you go by UNDP data, the continent outflow is $1.9 trillion in terms of illicit financial outflow. And inflow is approximately 1.2 trillion. So the continent is losing over 86 billion, somewhere thereabout. More than the foreign aid combined that comes from the outside. You can remove corruption, but it starts with building the infrastructure, educational, the ideas, working with people, creating the kind of transparency in business transactions that are necessary to enhance development.
I'll just add a couple of things there. I think, Nigeria with its kind of midstream and downstream value capture is something that all the countries that have minerals, and probably about 20 countries in Africa are really rich with minerals, are very cognizant of this case because they want to capture more of that midstream, downstream processing value. The problem that gets back to electricity is a lot of these capabilities require a lot of energy. These are energy intensive processes, don't have energy, and require pretty good transportation infrastructure, rail, ports, don't have those either. So this infrastructure deficit is a real impediment on growth. It's an impediment on capturing the downstream value of the resources I'm being given to grow the country. So I think it's really important. Corruption's interesting. And again, it's interesting, we're picking countries that Western people cringe at. So one we talked about, I'm going to talk about Saudi Arabia, which usually causes major cringe factor. So I only started going there 4 years ago. And I'll say this, MBSA, he ripped the guts out of corruption in a way that we don't appreciate. And you go there and it's like, wow. All the young people I got given a minder when I first went there. He was a kid that went to UCI, graduated from UCI, Saudi Arabia. I'm like, wow, what are you doing here? He goes, oh, I came back because of what MBS did to rip out corruption. He has like 90% popularity amongst young people that are basically all Western educated and want Western freedoms. They've all come back, man and woman. And it was all done on the basis that he ripped out corruption. So if you look at Saudi Arabia, yeah, he's done some things that we can't agree with ever, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't engage with countries or see that in the context of that country, it's the right thing. And when you get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of young people aged between, I guess, 20 and 30, all Western educated that massively support him and have gone home, it should take pause and say, well, maybe what he's done is in the context of his country the right thing to do. And that's what the young people do. So instead of throwing stones at these countries, we should say, and work with them to continue to develop institutions that will move them along. But again, it's about respect for the country and its stage of development. So.
Thank you. I believe we're out of time. I wanted to check with Krista.
Just one more quick question.
All right, one more quick one. We'll end with, how can we as consumers make ethical choices that don't contribute to human rights abuses in Africa?
I'll take a first shot at that. Oh, you think? Unattended consequences. Actually, it's a great question because I was just reading. I'm not sure there is because it's dangerous. The EU is just mandating food imports must be able to prove that the food did not come from deforested land. And it's destroying African agriculture in certain countries because it's all, kind of micro farmers, families farming. There's no way for them, there's no money for them or infrastructure to prove that the goods that bled into the supply chain that eventually gets to Europe was actually on deforested land. So now they're going, I'm sorry, we can't take those products and we can't sell them to Europe. So sometimes our ethical choices actually constrain and mean we can't take their goods. So again, it's like we need to be careful about the rules that we impose under, ethical choices actually hurt the very people we're trying to help. So maybe ethical consumer level choices is not the right way to go initially. So, and I thought that was a big standard because Africa's complaining a lot about these new EU regulations, which is a problem.
Part of the decision by the EU has to do with the climate mitigation issues. But consider this, financing climate mitigation in the continent of Africa will require, according to UNDP data, between 118 to 145 billion dollars annually. From where? From donors. Between 118 to 145 billion annually. So is the EU going to provide that or refuse to allow food coming or product coming from deforested land into the European Union, which means essentially making it difficult for perhaps a community, perhaps a family to feed themselves? I don't know where you draw that boundary. I like in this type of situation to look at the macro issues. And the macro issues are simply this. I'll be very brief about this. European Union can today end its common agricultural policies, which has more negative impact on Africans' ability to grow food and compete effectively. Just like US can end farm subsidy. These are the ethical choices we can make because they have far-reaching implications. So that in the end, policies we can implement will make it easy to transition from where we are to where we want to be. It's not an individual choice. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both for a very stimulating exchange of ideas. I think this has been really provocative and interesting for all of us. And I will now be handing it over to Krista.
Can we get another round of applause for our amazing speakers and moderator tonight? And here's our chairman, Mr. Rick Putnam.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Rick. I'm chair of the executive board. This is really an awesome discussion. You guys, Peter, Kelechi, thank you so much, Samar. You're real heroes for bringing awareness to us, you know, of a place that's so far away. We see it, you know, as in many cases in our circles as a place to go and tourist, et cetera. But there is so much to do to help the African countries and to appreciate them so much more. So thank you so much for bringing that awareness to us. We have a couple of little gifts for both of you. So we'd like to just present these to you as our appreciation again for, this is for you, Peter, and then as well for Kelechi. And then we have as well for Samar, a little pen and certificate as well. So thank you again for moderating. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please stay tuned for our upcoming events in September.
Thank you for all that service. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.